The marriage certificate was still warm in Jacob Carson's pocket when his bride disappeared from the wagon somewhere between Tahlequah and Muskogee, Oklahoma, vanishing like smoke in the March wind of 1881, without so much as a footprint to mark where she had gone. Jacob pulled the horses to a halt, his heart hammering against his ribs as he jumped down from the driver's seat and circled the wagon 3 times, calling her name until his voice cracked. Flora, Flora Grayson. But only the whisper of prairie grass answered him, and the afternoon sun beat down merciless and indifferent on the rutted dirt road that stretched empty in both directions. They had been married just 6 hours ago in the little church in Tahlequah, with wildflowers in her red gold hair and promises of forever on both their lips. Now the wagon seat beside him was empty. The quilt she had been wrapped against the spring chill lay folded and abandoned, and Jacob felt the bottom drop out of his world. He checked inside the wagon, though he knew she was not there. Their belongings were untouched, her trunk of clothes secure, the supplies they had purchased for their new life together all in perfect order. Nothing was missing except Flora herself. Jacob ran his hands through his dark hair, trying to think through the rising panic. They had stopped perhaps 20 minutes ago when the left rear wheel had hit a deep rut. He had climbed down to check for damage while Flora waited in the seat. The wheel was fine, and he had walked around to the front of the horses to adjust their harness. That was when he should have heard her voice, should have felt her presence. Instead, there had been only silence. His hands shook as he pulled out the certificate again, reading her name in elegant script. Flora Marie Grayson, now Flora Carson, 18 years old with green eyes that reminded him of deep forest pools and a laugh that made his chest ache with joy. They had met 8 months ago when he had come to Tahlequah to buy horses from her father's ranch. One look at her feeding the chickens in the morning sunlight, and Jacob knew he would never want another woman as long as he lived. He had courted her properly, enduring her father's scrutiny and her mother's careful questions, proving himself worthy through hard work and honest devotion, until finally, Thomas Grayson had given his blessing. The wedding had been small but perfect. Flora had worn her mother's dress, altered to fit her slender frame, and when she had walked down the aisle of the wooden church, Jacob had felt tears prick his eyes at the sheer beauty of her. They had said their vows with steady voices, though her hands trembled in his when he slipped the simple gold band onto her finger. Afterward, there had been cake and dancing and well wishes from the townsfolk who had watched them both grow into adulthood. Then they had set out for Muskogee, where Jacob had built them a small ranch house on land he had saved 5 years to purchase, a place where they could build their life together and raise the family they both wanted. Now she was gone, and every second that passed felt like glass in his lungs. Jacob forced himself to think like the tracker he was. He studied the ground around the wagon with careful eyes, looking for any sign of struggle, any indication of what had happened. The earth was hard-packed from weeks without rain, but there he found them. Boot prints. 2 sets, neither of them Flora's small feet. They approached the wagon from the south, moving in a crouch if the spacing was any indication. Jacob's jaw tightened as he followed the trail. The prints met at the back of the wagon, then moved away together toward a copse of cottonwood trees about 50 yards off the road. A third set of prints joined them there, lighter, dragging slightly. Flora, being pulled or carried, he found where horses had been tethered in the trees. 3 of them, judging by the disturbed ground and droppings. The trail led southwest away from the main road and into rougher country. Jacob stood there, his mind racing through options. He could ride hard back to Tahlequah and get a posse together, but that would cost him hours, maybe a full day by the time he convinced the marshal and gathered men. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to follow now, immediately, while the trail was fresh and Flora was still within reach. He made his decision in heartbeats. Jacob unhitched his best horse, a strong roan gelding named Ranger that he had raised from a colt. He transferred his rifle, ammunition, water, and some dried meat from the wagon to his saddlebags, then took a moment to hide the wagon as best he could by pulling it into the cottonwood grove and covering it with branches. If someone came along and stole their belongings, so be it. Material things could be replaced. Flora could not. As he swung into the saddle, Jacob tried not to think about why someone would take his wife. Ransom was the most likely reason, though her family was comfortable rather than wealthy. The darker possibilities he pushed away entirely, because entertaining them would make him useless with rage and fear. He had to stay focused, had to think clearly. Flora needed him to be the man she had married, strong and capable and unwavering. The trail led through increasingly rough terrain as the afternoon wore into evening. Jacob pushed Ranger hard, but not so hard that the horse would give out. This was not a sprint but a marathon, and he would need the gelding's strength for whatever lay ahead. The tracks were easy enough to follow for a man who had spent his life reading sign. 3 horses moving at a steady pace, not hurrying over much, which suggested the men did not expect immediate pursuit. That gave Jacob a small advantage. They would not be covering their tracks or taking precautions. As the sun began to set, painting the Oklahoma sky in shades of orange and crimson, Jacob found the first campsite. The fire was cold but not old, perhaps 3 or 4 hours since it had been extinguished. He dismounted and searched the area methodically. There was a spot where someone had sat apart from the others, and he found a scrap of white fabric snagged on a piece of brush. His heart clenched as he recognized the material from Flora's petticoat. She had been here. She was leaving him signs where she could. Jacob pressed the fabric to his face for just a moment, breathing in the faint scent of the lavender water she wore, then tucked it carefully into his shirt pocket next to the marriage certificate. "I am coming for you," he whispered to the gathering darkness. "I will find you, Flora. I swear it on my life." He made a cold camp that night, not wanting to give away his position with firelight. Sleep came in fits and starts, his body exhausted but his mind too wired with worry to truly rest. Every time he closed his eyes he saw Flora's face, the way she had looked at him during their wedding vows with such trust and love. She believed in him completely. He could not, would not fail her. Dawn came pale and cool. Jacob was in the saddle before the sun cleared the horizon, following the trail as it wound deeper into the territory. Around mid-morning, he came across a creek where the horses had stopped to water. Flora had left him another sign here, a small pile of stones arranged in an arrow pointing west. His wife was brilliant and brave, and pride mixed with fear in his chest as he followed where she directed. The trail led him across the border into Arkansas by late afternoon. He was entering the first of what would be 3 territories he would have to cross to find her. The landscape changed subtly, more trees and rolling hills than the Oklahoma prairie. Jacob stopped in a small settlement called Greenwood to water Ranger and ask if anyone had seen 3 men traveling with a woman. The general store owner, an older man with suspicious eyes, shook his head. "Lots of folks pass through here," he said. "I do not make it my business to notice them too much," but a young boy sweeping the porch spoke up. "I saw them, mister. Yesterday evening. The lady had red hair and she looked sad." One of the men, the one with the scar on his face, bought whiskey and tobacco. They headed west toward Fort Smith. Jacob flipped the boy a coin and was back on Ranger in moments. Fort Smith was a hub of activity, a place where outlaws and lawmen mixed in uneasy proximity. If the men who took Flora were heading there, they might be planning to put her on a train or riverboat, or they might be meeting someone. Either way, Jacob had to reach the city before he lost the trail entirely. He rode through the night, giving Ranger brief rests but pushing on with relentless determination. His body ached from the saddle and his eyes burned from lack of sleep, but the thought of Flora alone and afraid kept him moving. She had married him believing he would protect her, and in the first hours of their marriage he had failed that promise. The guilt ate at him like acid, but he channeled it into fuel for his pursuit. Fort Smith rose out of the Arkansas landscape like a promise and a threat. Jacob arrived in the early morning hours, the city just beginning to stir with activity. He went first to the marshal's office, hoping that the law might have seen or heard something useful. The deputy on duty was young and eager, listening to Jacob's story with growing concern. "I have not heard anything about a kidnapping," the deputy said, "but Fort Smith sees a lot of rough characters. Your best bet might be to check the hotels and boarding houses. If they are keeping the lady, they would need a room." Jacob thanked him and began a systematic search of every lodging establishment in Fort Smith. Hours passed in a blur of suspicious innkeepers and blank stares. No one had seen a woman matching Flora's description, or if they had, they were not talking. Jacob's frustration mounted with each dead end, but he refused to give up. She was here somewhere, or she had been. He could feel it. It was late afternoon when he finally caught a break. A washerwoman hanging laundry behind a shabby hotel called the Silver Dollar told him she had seen a red-haired woman being hurried into a room on the second floor the previous night. She was not happy about it neither, the woman said, her weathered face creased with sympathy. One of the men had her by the arm, gripping tight enough to bruise. "I almost said something, but those men looked like trouble." "Mean, you know." "Which room?" Jacob asked, his hand already on his rifle. "Second floor, third door on the right. But mister, they left this morning. I saw them loading up and heading out around dawn." Jacob's heart sank, but he pressed on. "Which direction?" "West again. I heard one of them mention Indian Territory." "Indian Territory." The lawless lands where jurisdiction was murky at best and dangerous men fled to escape justice. Jacob felt a chill run through him despite the warm spring day. He was already exhausted, already stretched thin, but the chase was leading him deeper into wild country where the rules of civilization barely applied. He bought fresh supplies and a second horse, a sturdy mare that could carry extra gear and spell ranger when needed. The investment took most of his remaining money, but Jacob would gladly spend every cent he had if it meant bringing Flora home. As he prepared to leave Fort Smith, he stopped at a church and lit a candle, offering a prayer for Flora's safety and his own strength to reach her in time. The trail west into Indian Territory was well traveled, which made tracking more difficult. Jacob had to rely on instinct and occasional signs that Flora managed to leave. A ribbon from her hair caught on a fence post, a pattern of stones at a crossroads pointing the way. His brilliant, resourceful wife was helping him find her even as she was being taken farther and farther from home. 3 days into Indian Territory, Jacob encountered a group of Cherokee men on horseback. He approached them carefully, hands visible and posture non-threatening. The leader, a man about Jacob's age with intelligent dark eyes and traditional clothing mixed with Western pieces, studied him for a long moment. "You are far from settled country," the man observed in perfect English. "I am tracking men who took my wife," Jacob said simply. 3 riders with a woman. "Have you seen them?" The Cherokee man exchanged glances with his companions. "We saw them yesterday. They stopped at a trading post near the Potow River. The woman tried to run, but they caught her. His expression was grim. We thought about intervening, but we were only 3 and they were armed and watching. Which direction were they heading? Jacob's voice was steady despite the fear clawing at his chest. Flora had tried to escape. She was fighting, still brave, still hoping he would come. North, following the river. But you should know, there are more of them now. They met up with 2 other men at the trading post. 5 total. 5 armed men against 1. The odds were not good, but Jacob had not come this far to turn back now. He thanked the Cherokee men and continued north, his mind already working through possible approaches. A direct confrontation would likely get him killed and leave Flora in even worse danger. He would have to be smart, patient, wait for the right opportunity. The Podhow River cut through the landscape like a silver ribbon. Jacob followed its course for 2 days, sleeping in short stretches and eating in the saddle. He was exhausted to his bones, his face covered in trail dust and stubble, but the fire burning in his chest never dimmed. Flora was ahead of him somewhere, and with each mile he felt he was getting closer. On the evening of his 8th day since Flora's disappearance, Jacob finally spotted smoke from a campfire in the distance. He dismounted and crept forward on foot, moving through the trees with the stealth his father had taught him during childhood hunting trips. As he drew near, he could hear voices, rough male laughter that made his jaw clench with anger. He bellowed down behind a fallen log and surveyed the camp. 5 men, just as the Cherokee had said, and there, sitting near the fire with her hands bound in front of her, was Flora. Jacob's heart seized at the sight of her. She was dirty and her dress was torn, her beautiful hair tangled and unwashed, but she held her head high with a defiance that made him love her even more fiercely. One of the men, the one with a scar across his face that the boy in Greenwood had mentioned, was speaking. Should have got a wire back from Colton by now. If he wants the girl, he needs to send the money quick. I am tired of dragging her across the territory. Maybe we should just sell her to the Comancheros, another man suggested. They would pay good money for a pretty white woman. Colton will pay better, Scarface said. He wants her specific because of her daddy, some kind of grudge from way back. We just got to be patient. Jacob's mind raced. Colton. He knew that name. Marcus Colton had been run out of Tahlequah 5 years ago for cheating at cards and stealing cattle. Thomas Grayson had been one of the men who testified against him, ensuring Colton spent 2 years in prison. This was revenge, pure and simple. Colton had paid these men to snatch Flora and planned to ransom her back to her father at an exorbitant price, or worse. The knowledge that this was calculated rather than random somehow made it more enraging. Jacob forced himself to breathe slowly, to think rather than react. 5 armed men. He could not take them all in a straight fight, but he could even the odds if he was clever. He spent the next 2 hours circling the camp, studying their positions and routines. 2 men seemed to be on guard duty while the others slept, rotating every few hours. Flora was tied to a tree on the far side of the camp, positioned so the guards could watch her. Jacob noted which men were the most alert, which ones drank too much and got sloppy. He marked where their horses were picketed and where their weapons were kept. As midnight approached, a plan formed in his mind. It was risky and required perfect timing, but it was the best chance he had. Jacob crept back to where he had left Ranger and the mare, gathered what he needed, and prepared to make his move. He started by spooking the horses. A well-thrown rock got them whinnying and stamping, and 2 of the men jumped up to check on them, leaving the camp less guarded. In the confusion, Jacob slipped closer to where Flora was tied. She had not seen him yet, her eyes downcast as she sat in exhausted misery. He waited until the guard nearest Flora turned his back, then moved like a shadow across the last 20 feet of open ground. His hand covered Flora's mouth just as she looked up, her green eyes going wide with shock and then flooding with tears of relief. Jacob pressed a finger to his lips, then quickly cut through the ropes binding her wrists with his knife. "Can you run?" he breathed into her ear. She nodded, her whole body trembling but her expression determined. Jacob took her hand and together they began to slip away from the camp, moving slowly and carefully through the darkness. They made it perhaps 40 yards before someone shouted an alarm. "The girl is gone. Find her." All pretense of stealth abandoned, Jacob and Flora ran. He pulled her through the woods, her hand gripped tight in his as branches tore at their clothes and faces. Behind them, he could hear the men crashing through the brush, shouting to each other as they spread out to search. Jacob led Flora to where he had hidden the horses. He threw her onto the mare and swung onto Ranger in one smooth motion, then kicked the gelding into a gallop with the mare following. The sounds of pursuit grew fainter as they raced through the night, but Jacob knew it was only temporary. Come daylight, the men would be able to track them, and they would be angry now, motivated by more than just money. They rode hard until both horses were lathered and heaving. Then Jacob found a creek and led them into the water, riding upstream for nearly a mile before emerging on the other side. It was an old trick but effective, breaking their trail and buying them precious time. As the sky began to lighten in the east, Jacob finally allowed them to stop in a dense thicket of trees. Flora practically fell from the saddle, and he caught her in his arms, holding her close for the first time since their wedding day. She was shaking uncontrollably, her face buried against his chest as sobs racked her body. "You found me," she gasped between cries. "I knew you would come, but I was so scared. Jacob, I was so scared." "I've got you," he murmured into her hair, his own voice thick with emotion. "You are safe now. I have got you, Flora." They held each other as the sun rose, neither willing to let go. Jacob's hands moved over her back, her arms checking for injuries. Aside from bruises on her wrists from the ropes and various scrapes, she seemed physically unharmed, but he could feel the trauma in the tension of her body, see it in the haunted look in her eyes. "Did they hurt you?" he asked quietly, needing to know but dreading the answer. "They were rough, and they said terrible things, but they did not." She could not finish the sentence, but Jacob understood. Relief flooded through him even as rage burned hotter at what she had endured. "I am so sorry," he said, cupping her face in his hands. "I should have been more careful. I should have protected you better. This is not your fault." Flora's voice was fierce despite her exhaustion. "Those men are evil and they chose to do this. You came for me, Jacob. You tracked me across territories to bring me home. You are the hero of this story, not the villain." He kissed her then, gentle and reverent, tasting the salt of her tears and pouring all his love and relief into the connection of their lips. When they finally parted, Flora managed a tremulous smile that made his heart ache. "We need to keep moving," Jacob said reluctantly. "Those men will not give up easily. We need to get across the border into Kansas where we can find proper law enforcement." Flora nodded, squaring her shoulders with visible effort. "I can ride. I will not slow you down." "You could never slow me down," he told her, helping her back onto the mare. "You are the strongest person I know." They rode northwest through Indian Territory, avoiding main trails and settlements where the outlaws might look for them. Jacob kept them moving at a steady pace that covered ground without exhausting the horses. He shot a rabbit that afternoon and they made a quick camp to cook it, the first real food Flora had eaten in days. She devoured her portion with shaking hands, and Jacob wished he had a dozen more rabbits to feed her. "Tell me about our house," Flora said as they ate. "I want to hear about it again." Jacob understood what she was doing, trying to focus on something good and normal to counter the trauma of the past week. He described their ranch in detail. The 2-room cabin he had built with his own hands, the barn for the horses, the chicken coop he had constructed with her in mind, because she had told him she wanted chickens. He talked about the garden plot he had prepared and the creek that ran through their property where they could fish and swim in the summer. "There is a big oak tree near the house," he said. "I thought we could hang a swing from one of the branches, for our children someday." Flora's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they seemed to be the good kind. "I want that so much. I want our life to start, Jacob. I want to forget all of this and just be your wife in our home." "Soon," he promised. "We are going to get through this, and then we are going to have the life we planned. All of it, Flora. The home, the children, the years together. I swear it to you." They traveled for 3 more days, always watching over their shoulders, always alert for signs of pursuit. Jacob saw tracks once that might have been the outlaws, but the trail veered east while they continued north, and eventually he dared to hope they had truly escaped. On the 4th day after Flora's rescue, they crossed into Kansas. The relief Jacob felt was palpable, as if they had passed through an invisible barrier from chaos into order. Kansas had law and civilization, towns with marshals and telegraph lines. They were not home yet, but they were safer than they had been. They stopped in the first real town they encountered, a place called Baxter Springs. Jacob rented them a hotel room and arranged for a bath to be brought up for Flora, while he went to the marshal's office to report what had happened. The marshal, a grizzled man named Garrett, listened to the story with growing concern. "Marcus Colton," he said thoughtfully. "That name has crossed my desk before. He runs with a bad crowd, operates mostly in Indian territory where the law has trouble reaching. But if he is organizing kidnappings, that is a federal offense. I will send wires to the marshals in Fort Smith and Muskogee, let them know what is happening." "Will it do any good?" Jacob asked, exhausted and skeptical. "Maybe, maybe not," Garrett admitted, "but at least it is on the record. You got your wife back, son. That is what matters. My advice is to get her home and let the law worry about Colton and his men." Jacob thanked him and returned to the hotel. He found Flora asleep in the bed, clean and dressed in a new nightgown he had purchased from the general store. She looked young and vulnerable in sleep, the ordeal written in the dark circles under her eyes, and the way her hands clutched the blanket even in rest. He sat in the chair by the window and watched over her as darkness fell, his rifle across his lap just in case. The past 9 days had aged him in ways he was only beginning to understand. He had left Tahlequah as a newlywed full of hope and excitement for the future. Now he felt like he had lived a lifetime of fear and desperation. But he had Flora back. That was all that truly mattered. She woke in the night, gasping from a nightmare, and Jacob was beside her in an instant. He held her while she cried, whispering reassurances until she calmed. They talked in the darkness about what had happened, Flora finally able to tell him the details of her capture and the days of travel with the outlaws. It was painful to hear, but Jacob knew she needed to speak it, to get the poison of the experience out into the open air where it could not fester. "They grabbed me when you were checking the wagon wheel," she said, her voice small. "They put something over my mouth that smelled strange and everything went dark. When I woke up, we were miles away and you were gone. I thought I would never see you again." "I would have searched for you until my dying breath," Jacob told her fiercely. "There is nowhere on this earth you could be taken that I would not follow." "I know that now," Flora said. "I left you those signs hoping you would find them, but also just to feel like I was doing something. Like I had some control. You were incredibly brave and smart. Those signs helped me track you, Flora. You helped save yourself. They left Baxter Springs the next morning, heading west toward Muskogee. Jacob wanted to push hard and get home as quickly as possible, but he could see that Flora was still recovering from her ordeal. He kept their pace moderate and made sure she ate and rested. Slowly, over the days of travel, he watched color return to her cheeks and strength to her movements. She smiled more readily, and the haunted look in her eyes began to fade. They stopped in small towns along the way, sleeping in hotels rather than camping because Jacob wanted Flora to feel safe and comfortable. Each night they grew closer, talking about their hopes and dreams, learning each other in ways their brief courtship had not allowed. Jacob told her about his childhood, about losing his mother to fever when he was 12, and learning to be a man from his father who was gruff but loving. Flora shared memories of growing up on the ranch, of her siblings and the games they played, of the books she loved to read that transported her to far-off places. "I never wanted to leave Tahlequah for adventure," she admitted one evening as they sat on the porch of a boarding house, watching the sunset. "I just wanted a good man and a quiet life. When you came to buy horses and I saw you talking with my father, so respectful and honest, I thought maybe you could be that man." "I am that man," Jacob said, taking her hand. "I will give you the quiet life you want, Flora. No more adventures, no more danger. Just peace and love and the family we will build together." "I think I might be ready for one small adventure," Flora said with a hint of mischief in her eyes. "I would like to see the ocean someday. Maybe when we are old and the children are grown, we could take a trip to California and see the Pacific." "Then we will," Jacob promised. "When we are old and gray, I will take you to see the ocean. We will stand on the beach and watch the waves and remember all the years we had together." The promise felt sacred, a commitment not just to survive but to truly live, to build a future worth remembering. They crossed back into Oklahoma in early April, nearly 3 weeks after Flora's disappearance. The land looked different to Jacob now, both more beautiful and more dangerous, a place where good and evil existed side by side, and the only thing a man could truly control was his own choices and actions. He chose to protect Flora, to love her, to build something lasting in the midst of chaos. As they approached Muskogee, Jacob felt nervousness flutter in his stomach. Their house was ready, but it was empty and untested. What if Flora did not like it? What if after everything she had been through, the simple ranch he had built felt insufficient? His worries proved groundless. When they crested the hill and Flora saw the property for the first time, her face lit up with genuine joy. The cabin was small but well built, with a stone chimney and real glass windows. The barn was sturdy, the chicken coop charming, and the oak tree with its spreading branches looked like something from a storybook. "It is perfect," Flora breathed. "Jacob, it is absolutely perfect." He helped her down from the mare and together they walked to the front door. Jacob had left it unlocked, trusting in the relative isolation of the property and the honesty of his few neighbors. Inside, everything was as he had left it. Simple furniture he had built himself, a rope bed with a new mattress, a table and chairs, a cook stove, shelves waiting to be filled with the belongings they had left in the hidden wagon. "Welcome home, Mrs. Carson," Jacob said, and swept Flora into his arms to carry her over the threshold. She laughed, the sound bright and pure, and wrapped her arms around his neck. "I have been Mrs. Carson for weeks now, but I feel like our marriage is just beginning." He set her down gently in the main room and kissed her, slow and deep, tasting the promise of their future. When they parted, Flora looked around with eager eyes, already planning where things would go and how she would make the house a home. They spent the rest of the day in happy domesticity. Jacob rode back to where he had hidden the wagon and, miraculously, found it untouched, He brought it and all their belongings to the ranch, and Flora unpacked while he tended to the horses and checked on the property. Everything was in order, the small herd of cattle he had purchased grazing peacefully in the south pasture, the garden plot ready for planting. That night, they consummated their marriage properly for the first time, coming together with tenderness and passion in the bed Jacob had built with his own hands. It was sweet and awkward and perfect, two people learning the geography of each other's bodies and hearts. Afterward, Flora lay with her head on Jacob's chest, his arm around her shoulders, and sighed with contentment. "I am happy," she said simply. "After everything that happened, I did not know if I could feel this way again, but I am truly happy, Jacob." "So am I," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her hair. "So am I." The weeks turned into months and they settled into the rhythm of ranch life. Jacob worked from dawn to dusk, building and improving, tending the cattle and horses, clearing more land for crops. Flora kept the house, cooked meals that made Jacob's mouth water, planted a garden that flourished under her care, and raised chickens that provided eggs and the occasional Sunday dinner. They worked hard, but they worked together, partners in every sense of the word. In June, Flora told him she was pregnant. Jacob received the news with joy and terror in equal measure, thrilled at the prospect of fatherhood but remembering all too vividly how close he had come to losing her. He became even more protective, though Flora laughed at his hovering and shooed him away when he tried to do all her chores for her. "I am growing a baby, not dying of consumption," she told him with exasperated affection. "Let me live my life, husband." But she did not mind his protectiveness too much, Jacob thought. She seemed to understand that it came from love and the bone-deep fear of loss that still occasionally woke him in the night, reaching for her in the darkness to confirm she was still there. News reached them that summer that Marcus Colton and 3 of his men had been captured by federal marshals in Indian Territory. They would stand trial for multiple crimes, including kidnapping. Flora received the news with quiet satisfaction, and Jacob felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The men who had terrorized his wife would face justice. It would not undo what had happened, but it was something. Thomas and Margaret Grayson visited in August, making the journey from Tahlequah to check on their daughter and meet their new son-in-law properly. The reunion between Flora and her parents was tearful and joyful, Margaret fussing over her pregnant daughter while Thomas pulled Jacob aside for a serious conversation. "I owe you a debt I can never repay," Thomas said, his voice gruff with emotion. "You brought my daughter back when I thought she was lost forever. You are a good man, Jacob Carson, better than I deserve as a son-in-law." "I love her," Jacob said simply. "There was never a question of not going after her." "Still," Thomas said, "not every man would have done what you did." "You have my respect and my gratitude." The Graysons stayed for a week, helping with the harvest and getting to know the ranch that was now their daughter's home. By the time they left, Margaret was satisfied that Flora was well cared for and happy, and Thomas had bonded with Jacob over horses and cattle, the language both men spoke best. Flora's pregnancy progressed without complication. As her belly swelled with their child, Jacob found himself overwhelmed with love and gratitude every time he looked at her. She glowed with health and happiness, singing as she worked and talking to the baby as if it could already hear and understand. In late February of 1882, Flora went into labor on a cold, clear night. Jacob rode through the darkness to fetch the midwife from Muskogee, then paced the main room of their cabin while the woman attended to his wife. The sounds of Flora in pain nearly unmanned him, but he forced himself to stay calm, to be the steady presence she needed. Just after dawn, a baby's cry filled the cabin. The midwife emerged with a smile. "You have a son, Mr. Carson, A big, healthy boy, and your wife did beautifully. Jacob went to Flora on shaking legs and found her propped up in bed, exhausted and radiant, holding a red-faced, squalling infant wrapped in a quilt. She looked up at Jacob with tears streaming down her face. "Our son," she said. "We have a son, Jacob." He kissed her forehead, then carefully took the baby into his arms. The infant was so small, so fragile, yet he gripped Jacob's finger with surprising strength. Looking down at his son's face, Jacob felt his heart expand in ways he had not known possible. This was his child, his and Flora's, a new life they had created together. "What should we name him?" Flora asked. They had discussed names for months but never settled on anything definite. Now, holding his son, Jacob thought about the journey they had taken to reach this moment. The fear and the hope, the darkness and the dawn, the way Flora had fought to leave him signs and the way he had refused to give up until he found her. "Joseph," he said. "Joseph Grayson Carson, after your father. What do you think?" Flora's smile was brilliant. "Joseph, I love it." "Welcome to the world, Joseph. We are so happy you are here." The baby settled in Flora's arms, his crying tapering off as he rooted for food. The midwife showed Flora how to nurse, and Jacob watched in wonder as his wife fed their son for the first time. The intimacy and beauty of the moment seared itself into his memory. A perfect snapshot of everything he had ever wanted. Life with a baby was exhausting, and messy, and more wonderful than Jacob could have imagined. Joseph was a healthy, hungry infant who kept them both up at night and filled their days with wonder. Jacob found himself marveling at every small thing his son did, every coo and stretch and gummy smile. Flora was a natural mother, patient and loving, singing lullabies her own mother had sung to her. In the spring, they planted a larger garden and expanded the herd. Jacob hired a young man from Muskogee to help with the heavy work, giving him time to be with Flora and Joseph. The ranch was prospering, modest but steady, providing everything they needed and a little extra besides. On a warm day in May, Jacob built the swing he had promised, hanging it from the sturdy oak tree near the house. Flora sat in it with Joseph on her lap, and Jacob pushed them gently, watching his wife laugh with pure joy as their son gurgled and reached for the leaves overhead. It was a simple moment, unremarkable in many ways, but Jacob knew he would remember it always. This was what he had fought for. This peace, this happiness, this family. "I have been thinking," Flora said that evening as they sat on the porch after putting Joseph to bed, "about what happened, about being taken and you coming after me." Jacob tensed, worried that she was having delayed trauma, but she took his hand and squeezed it gently. "I am not upset," she assured him. "I just want you to know that as terrible as it was, it taught me something important. It showed me the kind of man I married. You could have given up, could have assumed I was lost. But you did not. You came for me, and you did not stop until you brought me home. That means everything to me, Jacob. Everything." "I would do it again in a heartbeat," he said fiercely. 1,000 times over if I had to. "You are my heart, Flora. Without you, nothing else matters." "I feel the same way about you," she said softly. "When I was being taken farther and farther away, I held on to the belief that you would find me. That belief kept me sane and strong, and you did find me. You proved that our love is bigger than fear or distance or danger. That is a rare thing, Jacob. We have something rare." They sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Somewhere inside the cabin, Joseph made a small sound in his sleep. Their son, their home, their life together. It was everything Jacob had dared to dream and more. The years unfolded like the pages of a book, each one adding depth and richness to their story. A daughter arrived 2 years after Joseph, a tiny thing with Flora's red gold hair and green eyes. They named her Margaret, after Flora's mother, and called her Maggie. She was a spirited child who kept them on their toes, while Joseph grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved the horses and followed Jacob everywhere. 2 more children followed in the years after. Another son they named Samuel, and a second daughter called Ruth. The cabin was expanded twice to accommodate their growing family, and the ranch grew with it. Jacob became known throughout the region as an honest dealer with good stock, and Flora became the heart of their small community, always ready with a meal for travelers or a kind word for neighbors in need. They had hard times, certainly. A drought one year that cost them half the herd. A winter so severe that Jacob had to dig through snowdrifts just to reach the barn. Illnesses that had him and Flora up through the night, nursing sick children and praying for dawn. But they weathered each storm together, their bond forged in the crucible of that terrible journey across 3 territories, growing stronger with every challenge they overcame. Jacob never forgot the terror of losing Flora, and he made sure to tell her every day that he loved her. It became their ritual morning and evening, a simple exchange of words that carried the weight of everything they had survived. I love you, Flora Carson. I love you, Jacob Carson. 3 words, but they contained multitudes. When Joseph turned 18, he took over most of the day-to-day running of the ranch, showing a natural aptitude for the work that made Jacob's chest swell with pride. Maggie, spirited and independent, announced her intention to become a teacher and went off to college in St. Louis, a decision that terrified and delighted her parents in equal measure. Samuel and Ruth were still young, full of energy and mischief, keeping the house lively. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1901, Jacob surprised Flora with train tickets to California. The children were old enough to manage without them for a few weeks, and it was time to fulfill the promise he had made all those years ago on a boarding house porch in Kansas. They took the train west, marveling at how the country had changed in 2 decades. Towns had grown into cities, railroads crisscrossed the landscape, and the wildness of the West was slowly being tamed. It made Jacob a bit melancholy for the rough, uncertain world of his youth, but mostly he was grateful for the progress, for the safety and stability it brought to his children's generation. California was everything they had imagined and more. They stood on the beach at sunset, shoes off and toes in the sand, watching the Pacific Ocean roll endlessly toward them. The water was vast and powerful, ancient and new all at once. Flora gripped Jacob's hand, tears streaming down her face. "We made it," she said. "We said we would see the ocean when we were old, and here we are." "We are not that old," Jacob protested with a grin. He was 43, Flora 41. They had years ahead of them still. "No," Flora agreed, laughing through her tears, "but we have lived a whole life already. We have loved and suffered and built something beautiful, and now we get to stand here and see this wonder together. I am so grateful, Jacob, for all of it, even the hard parts, even being kidnapped," he asked, only half joking. Flora considered the question seriously. "Even that," she said finally, "because it showed me who you truly are. It tested us and we passed. Our marriage was forged in fire and it has burned bright ever since. So yes, even that." They stayed on the beach until full dark, talking about their children and their hopes for the future, about the ranch and whether Samuel might want to take over from Joseph someday, about Ruth's talent for drawing and whether she might become an artist. They talked about growing old together, about grandchildren they hoped to meet, about all the quiet days and simple joys still to come. When they returned to Oklahoma, it was with renewed appreciation for the life they had built. The ranch welcomed them home, and their children descended with stories and questions, and the controlled chaos that Jacob had come to associate with family. More years passed in what felt like heartbeats. Maggie became a teacher just as she had dreamed, and married a kind doctor from Tulsa. Joseph married a rancher's daughter from Arkansas and gave Jacob and Flora their first grandchild, a boy they named Jacob Jr. Samuel decided he wanted to study law and went east to school, while Ruth did indeed become an artist, her paintings of Oklahoma landscapes gaining recognition throughout the region. Jacob and Flora grew older together, their hair turning gray and their steps slowing, but their love never dimming. They still said their daily I love yous, still sat on the porch in the evenings watching the sunset, still reached for each other in the night. The bond forged when Jacob tracked her across 3 territories remained unbreakable, a foundation upon which they had built an entire life. In the winter of 1925, Jacob fell ill. He had been feeling poorly for weeks but refused to see a doctor, stubborn as always. Flora finally put her foot down and called for the physician, who diagnosed him with pneumonia. For weeks, the outcome hung in the balance. Jacob's strong body weakened by age and illness. Flora never left his side. She sat by his bed hour after hour, holding his hand and telling him stories of their life together. About their wedding day in Tahlequah. About the terror and joy of his finding her after she was taken. About the births of their children and the growth of their ranch. About standing on the beach in California, watching the ocean they had promised themselves decades before. "You have to fight," she told him fiercely when he seemed to be slipping away. "I did not survive being kidnapped, and you did not track me across 3 territories just so you could give up now. We have grandchildren to meet and more sunsets to watch and years left to love each other. So you fight, Jacob Carson. You fight to stay with me." And he did. Slowly, painfully, he climbed back from the edge of death. By spring, he was up and walking again, thinner and weaker than before, but alive. The experience changed him, made him more aware of time's passage and the preciousness of every moment. "I am not ready to leave you," he told Flora when he was well enough to sit on the porch again. "Not for a long time yet." "Good," she said, settling into her chair beside him and taking his hand. "Because I am not ready to let you go either." They had 7 more good years together. Years of grandchildren's laughter and family gatherings, of quiet mornings and peaceful evenings, of love spoken and unspoken in 1,000 small ways. Jacob's health was never as robust as it had been, but he made the most of every day, determined to wring joy from whatever time remained. In the fall of 1932, Flora became ill. It came on suddenly, a fever that would not break and a cough that racked her frail body. This time it was Jacob sitting vigil, holding her hand and telling her their story. He begged her to fight as she had begged him, but he could see in her eyes that she was tired, ready to rest after a long and full life. "I love you," she whispered on what would be her last night. "I have loved you since the day you came to buy horses from my father. I will love you beyond this life and into whatever comes next." "I love you," Jacob said, tears streaming down his weathered face. "You are my heart, Flora. You have always been my heart." She passed away just before dawn, peacefully in her sleep with Jacob's hand in hers. She was 72 years old and had lived to see all 4 of her children grown and happy, had held 8 grandchildren and 2 great-grandchildren. It was a good life, a full life, but Jacob felt the loss like a physical wound, a tearing of his very soul. He buried her on a hill overlooking their ranch, beneath the spreading branches of an oak tree similar to the one where he had hung the swing so many years ago. Their children gathered for the funeral, along with grandchildren and friends from throughout the region. Joseph delivered a eulogy that had everyone in tears, talking about his mother's kindness and strength, her unwavering love for her family. Jacob stood at the graveside after everyone else had gone, looking down at the fresh earth and the simple stone marker. "I will see you again," he promised. "When my time comes, I will find you. I tracked you across 3 territories once, Flora Carson. I can find you anywhere, even beyond this life. Wait for me." He lived another 3 years, staying active on the ranch with Joseph's help and enjoying his grandchildren when they visited. But there was a loneliness in him that nothing could fill, a Flora-shaped hole in his heart that ached with every breath. He did not want to die exactly, but he was not afraid of it either. Death meant reunion with the woman he loved, and there was comfort in that thought. On a spring morning in 1935, Jacob woke feeling strange. His chest was tight and his left arm tingled oddly. He knew what it meant. His heart, which had beaten for Flora for over 50 years, was finally giving out. He managed to make it to the chair on the porch, the same chair where he and Flora had sat countless evenings watching the sunset. Joseph found him there an hour later, slumped peacefully with a slight smile on his face. In his hand was the marriage certificate, yellow and brittle with age, that he had carried in his pocket the day Flora was taken. He had kept it all these years, a reminder of the vows they had made and the love that had sustained them through every trial. They buried Jacob beside Flora on the hill, their graves marked with matching stones. The inscriptions were simple. Flora Marie Carson, beloved wife and mother. Jacob Thomas Carson, beloved husband and father. But those who knew their story understood that the words did not begin to capture the depth of love represented by those 2 graves side by side. At the funeral, Joseph told his own children the story of how their grandfather had tracked their grandmother across 3 territories to bring her home. He told them about the courage and determination it had taken, about the bond forged in that terrible journey that had lasted a lifetime. "That is the kind of love you should aspire to," Joseph told them. "The kind that does not give up, that fights through fear and distance and danger to hold onto what matters most. Your grandparents had that love, and it blessed all of us who knew them." Years later, when Joseph's own children were grown and telling their children about the family history, the story of Jacob and Flora took on an almost mythic quality. The cowboy who rode across 3 territories to rescue his bride. The woman who left signs to help him find her. The love that endured through kidnapping and hardship, through raising children and building a life, through illness and age and finally death. The ranch stayed in the family for generations, each inheriting not just land and cattle, but the legacy of love and perseverance that Jacob and Flora had established. Their descendants grew and scattered across the country, but they always knew where they came from. They knew about the cowboy and his bride, about the journey across 3 territories, about the marriage forged in fire that had become the foundation of their entire family. And sometimes, on quiet spring evenings when the sun set gold and red over the Oklahoma prairie, if you stood on the hill where Jacob and Flora were buried beneath the oak tree, you could almost feel their presence. 2 souls who had loved each other so fiercely that not even death could truly part them. 2 people who had faced the worst the world could offer and emerged stronger, building a life of such beauty and meaning that it echoed down through the generations. The marriage certificate, yellowed and fragile, was eventually placed in a frame and hung in Joseph's house, then in his son's house, then his grandson's. A reminder of vows made and kept, of promises honored through every trial. The fabric from Flora's petticoat that Jacob had found during his search, the scrap he had carried next to the certificate, was kept in a small wooden box along with other family treasures. These simple objects became relics of a love story that refused to be forgotten. The ranch itself changed over the decades. Buildings were updated, technology advanced. The Wild West of Jacob and Flora's youth became history rather than lived experience. But the essential character of the place remained. It was still a home built on love and hard work, still a place where family gathered and stories were told, still a testament to what two people could create when they refused to give up on each other. On the 100th anniversary of Jacob and Flora's wedding, in 1981, the family gathered at the ranch for a reunion. Over 200 people attended, all descended from or connected to the cowboy and his bride. They shared a meal and told stories, passing down the history to yet another generation. Someone had researched the old newspaper accounts of Flora's kidnapping and Jacob's pursuit, finding articles that confirmed and expanded the family legend. The articles told of Marcus Colton's trial and conviction, of how he and his men had received long prison sentences for kidnapping and other crimes. They told of how a young cowboy named Jacob Carson had tracked his stolen bride across Indian Territory and into Arkansas, finally rescuing her in a daring nighttime raid that had become the stuff of local legend even at the time. The facts matched the family stories almost perfectly, validating what had been passed down through the generations. As the sun set on that reunion day, the family gathered on the hill by Jacob and Flora's graves. Someone had placed fresh flowers on the stones, bright blooms that swayed in the gentle breeze. They stood in silence for a moment, these descendants of love and courage, thinking about the two people who had started it all. Then, as if by unspoken agreement, they began to share their own love stories, marriages that had endured hardship, relationships that had overcome distance and doubt, loves that had required courage and faith and perseverance. Each story was different, but they all carried echoes of Jacob and Flora, proof that the legacy of their love had been passed down in more than just tales and memories. The ranch continued on, season following season, year following year. The oak trees grew taller, providing shade for new generations of children who played beneath their branches. The land yielded its harvest, cattle grazed the pastures, and the house rang with laughter and occasionally tears, all the normal rhythms of life. But if you knew where to look, you could still see traces of Jacob and Flora everywhere. In the careful craftsmanship of the original cabin, now preserved as a kind of museum within the larger ranch complex. In the old barn Jacob had built, still sturdy after more than a century. In the cemetery on the hill where they rested side by side, their love story completed but never truly ended, because love like theirs does not end. It transforms and continues, flowing through the lives they created and the family they built. It lives in every descendant who fights for their marriage when times get hard, in every person who refuses to give up on someone they love, in every act of courage and devotion that echoes, consciously or not, the journey Jacob made across 3 territories to bring his bride home. The story of Jacob and Flora Carson became a touchstone for their family, a reminder of what mattered most. When marriages struggled, elders would tell of the cowboy who tracked his bride across 3 territories. When young people doubted the existence of true love, they would hear about Flora leaving signs and Jacob refusing to stop until he found her. The story became a light in dark times, a promise that love was real and worth fighting for. And so, in a very real way, Jacob and Flora's love story never ended. It continued in every generation, every marriage, every family gathering where the tale was told again. 2 people who married one spring morning in 1881, whose happiness was threatened before it barely began, who faced that threat with courage and determination and emerged victorious. Two people who built a life of such substance and meaning that it could not be contained in one lifetime, but had to spill over into the lives of all who came after. Their graves on the hill overlooked the ranch they had built together, the land they had loved, the life they had created from determination and devotion. And though their bodies had long since returned to the earth, their spirits seemed to linger in the place they had made their own. In the rustle of oak leaves in the wind, in the gentle flow of the creek where they had fished and their children had played, in the very soil itself, enriched by their labor and tears and triumphs, Jacob and Flora Carson had lived and loved and built something that endured, a family, a legacy, a love story for the ages. And though the wild west of their youth had long since been tamed, though the dangers they faced had faded into history, the essential truth of their story remained as vital as ever. Love is worth fighting for. Family is worth building. And sometimes, the greatest journey of all is the one we take to bring home the person who holds our heart, whether that journey is across 3 territories, or across a lifetime, or across the mysterious distance between this world and the next. Jacob had promised to find Flora wherever she was taken, and in the end, he had kept that promise beyond even death. Their souls reunited in whatever lay beyond this mortal life. The sun set golden over the Oklahoma prairie, painting the sky in shades of crimson and orange and violet. The wind whispered through the oak trees on the hill, and for just a moment, if you listened very carefully, you could almost hear it. 2 voices, worn smooth by age and time, speaking words they had said 10,000 times and never tired of saying. I love you, Flora Carson. I love you, Jacob Carson. 3 words, simple and true, that contained an entire world.